The Global Energy Leaders Podcast, episode 89.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. In today's episode, we talk about something that we've actually touched on a little bit before, which is solar energy and its impact in Europe. And so we bring on Jan Fousek, who is all over the place in Europe. If you're not familiar with him, we will link to all of his information in the show notes. But a little bit about him. He's the chairman of the Supervisory Board for the Solar Association of the Czech Republic. He is also the CEO of an association for energy storage and batteries. We will link to all of his companies and where you can find him at in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Jan Fousek. Well, Jan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today, all the way from the Czech Republic. How's it going?
It's going all the fine. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Doing well. So what is the weather? We're recording this for the listeners' benefit on August 28th. So what's the weather over in the Czech Republic like right now?
Ryan, today it was like 25 degrees, of course, Celsius to Fahrenheit and 25 degrees. But it has been pretty changing within the last couple of days, and it's supposed to be the same. So the energy trading will be pretty hard here in Europe in the next couple of days. So it's changing between, let's say, 18 degrees during the night and let's say 32, 33 during the day. So something like this.
Okay, wow, that's a pretty big swing there. But okay, well, let's get into it. You mentioned energy trading. Why don't you set the table for the listeners, what you mean by that term, and we'll dive into it.
Well, energy trading is the same energy as everywhere else. We don't have a special price for green energy, but what we have the energy generated from the power plants. And since, for example, Solar Global Energy, which I am, by the way, running, we produce our own solar power energy, since Solar Global is a number 3 in Czech Republic as a solar power, which means clean energy producer. So we trade our own energy, and some other clients, but all of them are PV solar power producers. And none of them are mixing it with the traditional, conventional, like a gas and coal heating power plant. So that's what we mean by green energy.
So when you say trading, though, are you talking about in the standpoint of you're trading it for another commodity or for dollars, or how does the trading aspect work?
For euros. I mean, the energy market in Europe is pretty much developed, and I like it. There's a lot of potential you can do on the market. And when you trade a power, you are there. You have a daily market. You trade the day ahead. You can fix it on the exchanges. There's several exchanges we can trade on. Basically, each country or each European developed markets, like bigger countries like Germany or France or something, all of them have their power exchange, and you can basically trade over the counter or on the exchange. You can trade all the way from, let's say, Latvia to Portugal to Atlantic Ocean. So that's what you can do. You can use the differences between the prices on the weekly basis, yearly basis, monthly basis, up to the 15-minute basis in Germany. So that's what you can do. You can just speculate on what the weather will be like, what your production will be like, what the prices will look like. That's what you can do.
So that's interesting. It's the first time I've heard of this. Obviously, I'm familiar with people in the U.S. and abroad trading oil prices, but I've never heard of trading solar energy prices. So what exchanges can you find these prices on if you were wanting to do some trading?
First, Brian, it's a good question, but please let me a little bit correct what's the solar power and normal power. The exchange itself does not recognize or makes the difference between solar power and normal power. What makes the difference is that there were in 2009 and 2010 and partially in 2011, there were the huge green bonuses like feeding in tariffs, which were supporting the building of the solar power plants, right? So at that time on the exchange, you got around 50 euros per megawatt hour but from government, basically from Brussels, from European Union, but through your own state, you were getting about 500 euros per megawatt hours, which means 10 or 15 times more than what was the price on the exchange. So that's what makes the difference between normal power and solar. But when you produce it and you bring it to the market, you just get this bonus from the state, from the government, but from the exchange, you just get the power for normal energy, which is being produced from coal power plant, biomass, biogas, coal, whatever, from nuke, from everything.
Interesting. So I want to transition here just a little bit because you brought up solar energy, green technology. I know Europe. One of the problems that they have, at least from the state side, it seems, is that there's kind of this battle, if you will, with Russia, and they sell a lot of energy to Europe, and the European nations are kind of sitting back and going, well, if we buy from Russia, it kind of puts us in a bad spot. We'd prefer to buy maybe from the U.S. or somewhere else, a little bit more friendly, not as hostile. But the Russians are trying to lower their prices right now, I know. But it seems that green energy, especially solar, might be the solution to kind of fit the gap for these European nations to be able to get off of Russian energy and self-produce their energy. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very interesting topics, and since I guess we have like a half an hour or 1 hour or something, we absolutely cannot make it. What I just can say is that I'm delivering a speech in average like twice or at least once per month during the whole year, where this is being discussed on all the levels, starting on the ministerial and presidential level all the way down to the clerics level. Just everyone discussed this. And the biggest problem from my point of view is not the risk coming from Russia. The only risk coming from Russia is through LNG, right, from the gas supplies. But the LNG market worldwide, globally, just was so much, it became better that you have a lot of new LNG terminals being built in Qatar, in other countries, and we are building new gas pipelines, and I guess it's a little bit like a media fake that we are risking some kind of like a huge crisis. Unless there is a open war between states and Russia or China involved, then I don't think, I think that everyone is so happy about the situation that we have some gas. Because what's more important, but it's still related to that, the most important thing, which is about to happen within a couple of years, and it's already happening, is that Germany declared the phase out of nuclear power, of nuke, until 2023. But in 2023, it doesn't mean that they will close all their nukes, but they will close the last one. And they started doing it right now, and most of them will be closed in next couple of years. And can you imagine what's the installed capacities of all the nukes in such a superpower, especially energy superpower, as the Germany is? So the biggest question is not if Russia or is bad or America is more hostile or something. The biggest problem is not LNG or gas generally supply, but the biggest problem is how we can ensure the energy supplies to citizens and to our industry. We will have a gap of tens and maybe hundreds of gigawatts of installed capacities. And we have only, let's say, 40 years how you can make it up. So you have to still rely on the coal power plant. And now the question appears if the nuke or the coal is better. Or from our point of view, it's good to rely on the gas because it's at least 50% cleaner than the coal. So from my point of view, and I agree also, or I agree with my colleagues, let's say from Solar Association as well, that we see the future in renewables, of course, but the level of installed capacities it's going to be in units of gigawatt, not tens of gigawatts or not even hundreds of gigawatts. So we will most likely not make it in renewables, but we wish, right? We do everything we can to support this scenario, but it's not going to happen. So let's make as much as possible to build the renewables. We can add probably 100 gigawatts of installed capacity till that time, till 2023. It's just my estimation. And then we have to keep some nukes to be running, and together probably with gas power plants and unfortunately with some coal power plants as well.
Okay, so you covered a lot of space there. I want to kind of recap before we move on.
Sorry for that.
No, it's fine. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. The biggest threat that you say to European energy really is not from maybe a political standpoint, Russia, U.S., China, unless something breaks out there. It's really the stopping of what's going on in Germany with their nuclear power plants, and
exactly.
And someone has to replace that energy. And if that's what I heard. That's what I heard. Correct?
Exactly. That was absolutely right.
Okay, and so what you're saying is that solar can fit some of that gap, but not the whole thing, and probably LNG or coal will have to make up the majorities, correct?
Exactly, and I wish that the renewables would be the source. But if you imagine that in 2011, when there was a huge support for solar, there was added 23 gigawatts, but last couple of years it's about 8 or 9. Or we expect this year, in average scenario, to be added about 8 or 9 gigawatts. So you can't make all the nuclear phase out.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question, and this is something I'm curious about. I talked to a lot of solar professionals, and it seems that the battery technology, as it pertains to solar energy, is really kind of the thing that's holding solar back right now. If they could get batteries, maybe to increase their potential and to hold energy better, then solar could really get a foothold in the market. What is your take on the battery debate?
That's exactly the topic which makes me busy probably the most within the last couple of months, and I expect, and I kind of like it, to be busy with this stuff. I expect it will take most of my time within the next couple of years, or at least months, because exactly we see, as you said, Ryan, we see the future of energy markets with smart grids, where the grids will, in intelligent form, communicate with households, with houses and households with their batteries on the roof, with their batteries in the garage or in the cellar or whatever, with electric car being parked in garage, being charged by green energy, and upon some certain conditions which are already started existing. They are being tested right now in Germany and in some other countries, that such countries, and we already have those technologies, we just have to change the mind of the politicians. And that's one of the toughest stuff, the most difficult stuff we are facing right now, the problems, especially in Czech Republic. So we just have to change the mind of the politicians, and let's say the old generation of energy professionals, let's say, they are in favor of nuke and brown coal technologies and everything. Just change the mind and say, hey guys, just at least start using the term of batteries or energy storage to our legislation. So our neighboring country, which we shared our history with almost for 1,500 years, this country already works with 100, it's an average, with 150, an estimation, with 150 megawatts of installed capacities of batteries, which are actively used as ancillary services for keeping the balance of German grid, while we are building only our second megawatt. And our energy law, the national energy law, does not even know the term of battery or energy storage, and that's something what has to be changed. When it would, then we are walking towards the future.
And one final question, just on just the general rollout of kind of what you're talking about here. I know in the oil and gas standpoint, the minerals when you get out to the U.S. are pretty much owned by the governments across the world. How would something like this be rolled out in a country like the Czech Republic? Would the government go in and buy up a bunch of land to put out these solar plants, or would you look for outside solar fields rather, or would you look for outside investors to come in and put up private solar panels? What is your take on how would you get these massive solar farms in place? The
biggest problem is the lack of support which you have, and the You probably heard, and it was the problem for most of the Europe, but Central and Southeastern Europe was the worst. That there were, and I mentioned that in the beginning of our interview, that there was a huge problem in 2009 and 2010 and partially 2011 in a really huge exaggerated support for renewable energy sources and especially for photovoltaics. And then it was absolute opposite way around, that they just completely banned it. Then they just stopped any form of support and incentives and subsidies. And that's the problem right now. So it doesn't matter if the international investor come in, if we build it on our own, there are almost no incentives for investors to do it. And the only incentives which we have are partially, or at least in part of the sum, of the total sum of the money we have for the roof installations linked to the batteries. And what's the most promising right now, that there are new operational programs from European Unions. They are, I have to say, set up pretty good finally for the first time, which gives you the subsidy or the donation for building your own renewable source, mostly, let's say, photovoltaics on the roofs. It's also for the companies, not only for the households. It's for the companies, so you can put on your warehouse or whatever you have, or a store. You can put there the photovoltaic panels and with the batteries, and you can cover up to 80% of all the costs. But it's not the question of the investors coming in. It's the question of lack of luring, of enticing.
Right. No, you're right about that, because if you look at somewhere like Africa, there's tons of money that's being poured into solar projects down there. And so it's just awareness on some level. And speaking of awareness, I know that you kind of play a role in the European understanding and bringing the European legislators and governments up to speed on what's going on with green energy, solar energy especially. And one of the things you see here, at least in the States, is that let's say you take a politician who may start out at the local level, and by the time he gets to the national level, he works his way up through the chain, he gets to the national level. Some of the stuff he talks about, especially as far as energy policy is concerned, the information is kind of outdated. He may have understood it when he was on the local level, but as he worked through the system and kind of got caught up in all the stuff that's involved with that, he kind of lost what all the trends and technology and all the stuff that's changed. And so you'll see politicians in the U.S. that are in the U.S. Senate or the presidential level, wherever, that they start talking about energy, and it's like, yeah, we've kind of moved on past that. Do you kind of face those same challenges in Europe, where maybe a politician who gets in has really good motives, and by the time they actually get to somewhere they can make a difference, they haven't kept up enough with what's going on to be able to get the change that you're looking for?
Well, here, first of all, we have to understand the difference in the political situation and generally in the governmental style of the European Union compared to states, right? You still have your federal government, and then you have your local governments, but still you have one federal government. We are supposed to have something like that, or maybe it's presented like this, that we have, let's say, the European government, the one in Brussels, but it's not really true. The problem is that the plans for the energy union, the similar one as we have the currency union, the monetary union, where which brought us euro, right? And we have common agriculture policy, and we are supposed to have, or our politicians, the politicians in Brussels, plan to have common energy policy. But the problem is that they have some idea. I agree with that in most of their points. Their idea was transformed into so-called winter energy package. You probably heard about it. It was presented in November 2016, which means it's almost 1 year old right now. And they present it exactly the way how the Europe is supposed to be, full of renewable energy sources, slowly starting banning the coal production, etc., and the batteries and the self-consumers support, etc., etc. But the problem is that they are just the visions which have to be transformed to the local government. And the problem is that our mix of energy sources is so different in most of the countries that to find a common agreement is really, really hard. And I can just give you one example. We are surrounded by Germany, Poland, Slovakia, and Austria. Austria is super green country, and all of them are from Prague, from me where I'm now sitting. All those countries are up to 200 or 300 kilometers from me, so it's really close. Germany is super green, as you probably know. Austria is super green, as you probably know, reliant, let's say, 30-40% on renewables. And then you have Poland, which relies on more than 90% on the brown coal. And how do you think that the Polish government will come to Brussels and say, yeah, sure, okay, we just say we commit to the reduction of, let's say, 30 or 40% within 10 or 15 years? It's impossible. It's 5 times bigger than their GDP to invest into it. So I agree with you, and I would like to, in this particular thing and topic, I would like to be managed from Brussels. But the problem is the difference in the national energy mix.
Gotcha. And you were involved in that conversation. For our listeners who don't know, you are one of the leading voices over in Europe talking about this, pushing legislation, dealing with this on the, I don't want to say the national scale because it's a continental scale, maybe the better way to describe it. So what role are you think that you're going to play moving forward in this discussion, and what role do you hope to play?
I guess, if I can say, I see my biggest added role in connection, in keeping connecting the traditional energy supporters. I mean, the guys, and I don't want to offend anyone, please, God see it. But the guys, they were the energy experts and even ministers of industry or energy during the communist era, let's say 30, 40 years ago. But there was a lot of water flew since then. A lot of things happened, and they just can't sit on their chairs and keep saying, no, just continue with the brown coal, let's continue with gas and new. No, it's impossible. We have to transform, and we have to change our way of minds. And I'm representing this sector, but as a former owner of Virtuse Energy, which was the emissions and energy trading company, I have a lot of, I would say, connections among the industry guys and factories in Europe, let's say in traditional energy sector. So I guess and I hope that my biggest added value in this will be still opening and widening the discussion between the supporters of the modern energy, which means renewable sources, together, with batteries, with smart energy homes and smart grids, together with a traditional energy supporters.
Okay, well, let's say worst case scenario happens. I don't get to talk to you again for another half decade or decade. I hope we have you on before then, but let's just say it doesn't. 5-10 years from now, we get you back on the show. What is solar going to look like in Europe?
Interesting question, but I don't think it will be really hard to answer. The situation, I'm afraid, in solar and in let's say share of the energy mix will be, of course, shifted a little bit towards the renewable energy sources, but I don't think so significantly that you would get a heart attack within a decade from now on. I really think that, speaking in general numbers, I get that we will add 10, maximum 15%, but I would more say 10% in the share of renewable energy sources, but it still won't be the source number one. We still have some nukes. I hope so. I'm not a real big fan of building the new nuclear power plants, but what I think is that we shouldn't close, especially the newer one. We shouldn't close them so quickly. So I guess there will be some renewables, some nukes, and hopefully increased number of gas fueled power plants. And the only thing I wish the most is the push and the press on decreasing the amount and percentage of the share of the dirtiest power plants, which are usually the mazout and brown and coal burning power plants.
Okay, well, we're going to let you get out here with this. I know you are all over the place. You are in the Solar Association of the Czech Republic. You have a company that you manage. Where can the folks that they're listening, they want to connect with you, they want to find out more about what you have going on? You mentioned that you do a lot of presentations. Go ahead and throw out a few places people can find you, connect with you, and follow your work.
That's interesting. LinkedIn is the number one. So you just follow my name, which you can see probably under the podcast. It will be visible. So you can follow my name and you can find me on LinkedIn. I am happy to be there. And if someone contacts me, sends me a message or something, asks me something, I always reply. It never happens that I don't do it. Unfortunately, I don't have a Twitter as your president, but I will probably have to open one soon as well. No, really, I'm for personal matters and for keeping in touch, since I'm really busy lately, to keep in touch with my friends. I have Facebook and LinkedIn for the working matters, and of course emails. You can find it on the webpage of the Association for Energy Storage, which I'm running, also on the Solar Association, as well as on the web pages of Solar Global. And even my phone, and I'm happy to exchange my views with a lot of others. I have friends all over the world, I have to say, and it enriches your mind to exchange the views with others.
Absolutely. No, that's one of the things I love about international travel is that you get to go and you get to meet people who have different, just completely worldviews than you do, and they get to tell you stuff. You're like, oh, I never thought about something from that perspective.
Indeed.
You don't walk away. Maybe you don't agree with everything, but your horizons are at least broadened, and that's what I love about doing the show. Get people on like yourself from all the way across the pond, as we like to say here in the U.S. We will link to all of that stuff in the show notes. Also, we will link to the study that you mentioned, the Winter Report, which is I think officially called the communication from the commissions of the European.
You mean a winter energy package, we call it. And it's the officially law proposal. It has 1,200 web pages, so it's really a huge document. So it's a real proposal, which is really being discussed right now all over the European governments, local governments.
Sure. There's an abbreviated version I think we'll link to on the show notes, so people can check that out. And anyways, but thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to having you on again as this discussion continues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your invitation. It was my pleasure to be part of your show. Thank you, Ryan.
The Global Energy Leaders Podcast is produced by Michael Sims and Chris Prine. Chris Prine also serves as editor for the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R² Global.